Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our session today on impediments to foreign direct investments into the Central Asia, Mongolia, Caucasus, and Afghanistan region. We today have speakers who will be speaking about the investments, promoting, but as well as mentioning the impediments and the barriers that we have currently for investors who are willing to invest and work in the CAMCA region. I am happy to introduce to you our speakers who are already logged on. We're expecting more to join us later. Please allow me to introduce you Yernar Zharkeshov, who is the principal and head of Eurasia of Whiteshield Partners, and he is also the CAMCA network member from Kazakhstan. And I'm also happy to introduce to you Baurjan Kankin, who is the chairman of the Social Entrepreneurship Corporation, Shimken. He is also from Kazakhstan. And we are waiting for more speakers. However, because Yernar has an extensive report from his company, I think we can begin now because of all the content that he is excited to deliver today. Yernar, the word to you, please.
Thank you, Gaukhar. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to friends, to colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a particular privilege and honor to join this session, and we have an interesting panel as well. I mean, we have colleagues coming from Mongolia, Uzbekistan. Hopefully they should be able to join. But in a few slides, I just wanted to really share some food for thought for us, the people from this region, to look at together. So today I will present the Global Investment Opportunity Index of Whiteshield Partners, which is actually a new attempt to measure the investment attractiveness in the region and in 111 countries, given the pandemic era. So I would like to ask to share the screen, the organizers. So while we share the screen, I want to mention that we have the value added of this index is that we take into account not only economic parameters, but also the health and different kinds of risk issues, political risks, but also risks of appropriation, etc. So in a few slides, I want to share the preliminary results of this. Can you go to the first slide? Yeah, first slide. In a few slides, I want to share what it means to basically the overall economy, to the overall economy of CAMCA. If we can go to the first slide, please, Matt. So we see that overall the impact of the pandemic on FDI globally has been significant. Of course, we see a significant decrease of the total investment, 44% of the pre-COVID level. We have, of course, the investments across different regions, and we know that there are winners and losers of this pandemic. And we see that clearly Asia, if you can see on the map, is winning in terms of the strong markets, low risks with a focus on digital logistics. We see that, you know, the negative growth we can see in Europe and South America. So clearly Asia, including the CAMCA region, should be winning from this pandemic in a more broad sense, but how we should think together. Next slide, please. Now, the index that we mention, or what we're mentioning, the Investment Opportunity Index, consists of 3 pillars. What we look at is first the change in policy. The policy pillar consists of the usual suspects. We will look at the country's FDI restrictiveness stemming from the OECD methodology. We look at the changes in tariffs, the lockdown intensity, the central bank rates, in terms of the changing during this pandemic, in particular, profit tax rate, capital mobility, etc., to understand what are the policy changes that our countries, actually, this index actually measures 111 countries, but today I want to talk more about the CAMCA countries. So we look at the policy changes, what policy changes that the governments have introduced to counter the effect of the pandemic. Next, we will look at the risks. So in terms of the COVID-19 risks, market and political risks, of course, a number of cases, number of deaths, and the COVID impact on the economy, but also the risks of appropriation, the GDP collapse risk, etc. Third, we look at the market fundamentals, and there are 18 indicators, of course, the macroeconomic fundamentals, but also the growth indicators, the population, the size of the market, but also the potential of the economy in terms of the digitization, infrastructure, the health and the pharma, logistics, and freight potential of these countries. So the goal was to really look at what regions and countries are actually able to alter their policies and reposition themselves for investment despite the pandemic. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this index is a work in progress. So here we have colleagues now joining from different countries. As you can see, we emphasize that it's a tool for governments to really adjust themselves in terms of the policy, but also understand what are the strengths that we can leverage as a region and then as individual countries for FDIs. So we see that globally, the northern part of Eurasia is strong in terms of capital mobility and less restrictive lockdown measures. We have countries of in the region of India and China that exhibit more lowest average profit tax rates, whereas the more advanced economies, of course, are much stricter in terms of the lockdowns and then the increased tariffs, and there is more protectionism from their sides. Next slide. Overall, we see in terms of the risk pillars, of course, we know that surprisingly, China is one of the least economically impacted by COVID countries because of the way they handled the lockdown early enough, and whereas we have different risks in terms of the political risks in terms of the market fluctuations in most of the developing countries. But we see that overall we see the deglobalization, the trends of protectionism, and of course many countries are focusing on their domestic market security, food security. That's why we have significant domestic supply chain disruptions, which is understandable. Next slide. Can we have the next slide? Now, in terms of the market pillars, of course, advanced economies, because of the stronger institutions, we have most stable market fundamentals, whereas the advanced economies are adjusting their policies. And if you look at the initial results, of course, the usual suspects like Singapore, Switzerland, and Japan are leading the way in terms of the investment opportunities globally because of the different factors. But now, what does it mean to the CAMCA region? So I want to switch to the CAMCA region in particular. Please, next slide. So how attractive are CAMCA countries in terms of the investment? Now, we see that overall countries like Mongolia and Armenia have less constraints for investors among the whole region of CAMCA. Why? There are different factors for that. So overall CAMCA countries, there are strengths in terms of the favorable conditions and regulations for FDI attraction. There are some timely measures that were put in place, including taming the spread of the COVID-19, but also we shouldn't forget about the oil prices that were actually fluctuating, and really double shock of these two phenomena really impacted the economies of CAMCA. And of course, we see across the CAMCA region compared to low profit tax rates that should be propelling the greater business activity. In terms of the weaknesses of the whole region, is of course as relatively slow population growth. Secondly, still ICT infrastructure remains one of the weak areas that we should focus on, of course, and of course macroeconomic instability we expressed by higher inflation rates, devaluation of different currencies. I guess these are general, as you say, very high level understanding and explanations of the of the situation, but let's go country by country, and I will not take too long. I will just stop on 2 countries. Next slide, please. Now let's take Mongolia. Well, investment opportunity index shows that Mongolia is 22nd overall ranking, which is pretty good, I think, in terms of the fundamentals and the response. Until recently, Mongolia has done a great job in taming the virus, but now we know that the numbers have changed, and there is an increasing number of cases in Mongolia, unfortunately. But this index was created before this increase in Mongolia. But overall, we see that compared to low profit tax and the timely measures to really contain the virus spread were actually well received. But also there are some FDR attraction measures. The regulations were actually more or less aligned with the OECD standards. I think there was a lot of homework done by the Mongolian government to work towards the OECD standards. So I think it's something that should be built on for this country. In terms of the weaknesses, of course, the areas for improvements are the lower levels of social, well-being in terms of the GDP per capita. Of course, there's still a lack of internal fiscal potential, I guess, but the market fundamentals are there. Of course, the number 1 issue in Mongolia is job creation and supporting the SMEs, I guess. And ICT infrastructure, of course, remains one of the weak areas, of course. But I think there are ways to handle that. And I think it's amazing to see how CAMCA region countries can learn from each other. It's usually it's much easier to learn from emerging economies rather than from far advanced economies, whose cases and experiences might be less of relevance. Next slide. And Kazakhstan, in terms of the overall ranking, is 89th overall rank. There are issues with the macro fundamentals, I guess. In terms of the strengths, of course, you can see larger economy, GDP per capita is there, is relatively high, and in the region, yes, profit tax, yes, ICT infrastructure is there, affordable internet, affordable infrastructure, and that actually is driving e-commerce in Kazakhstan. But on the other hand, there are issues in the country in terms of the macroeconomic instability expressed by higher inflation rates, and that is leading to devaluation of the currency, and of course low performance in logistics with great potential, but the logistics and the freight policy is now being ramped up by initiatives like World Logistics Passport that Kazakhstan has joined as a hub. Now Uzbekistan is also participating in it as a beneficiary. So interesting policy changes are happening, but I think this index can be used as a tool for governments to really adjust their policies. Next slide. I think I have only a couple of slides left. So in terms of the policy interventions, most CAMCA countries could actually work on high potential SMEs in winning sectors. Winning sectors would include, of course, health and pharma, e-commerce, and of course, the more stable sectors would be related to infrastructure, sectors like electricity, gas, ICT, etc. Next slide. So in terms of improving the business climate, investment climate, I think it's important to see how we can work together as one region, but also how we can learn from each other's experiences. A few slides about the solutions. So what? Next slide. So what we devised here in the UAE and in Kazakhstan and other countries is called national agenda teams, something that could be worked as new government working groups, but they are called national agenda teams that include actually the businesses, the bureaucrats, but also the civil society organizations in concrete teams that are temporary for 100 days, 150 days to solve particular issues in a very accelerated manner. Next slide. And there are some cases that actually work in practice. There's a whole 10-step methodology behind these national agenda teams that could be implemented at the government level, but also at the city levels. Next slide. Can we have next slide, please? Well, one of the country cases, the UAE, which actually created the national agenda team at the federal level, working on different issues, including the doing business. So actually, they've increased the ranking. They improved their ranking from 2016 to 2019, from rank 31 in 2016 to rank 11 in 2019. It is exactly because of the whole of country approach, the structural reforms, FDI attractions through these national agenda teams that could be implemented in countries of CAMCA. I know I'm aware of time. I think the last slide is the next slide. The same methodology was introduced in Kazakhstan at the national level with the Prime Minister's office. But next slide. The same methodology of government accelerators and national agenda teams were implemented at the city level of Nur Sultan. So, I mean, given our context, given our mentality of our civil servants, these kind of solutions work quite well as well, adjusted to the local contextuality. So, I'm looking forward to working with governments, with my colleagues across the CAMCA region, to really understand how we can implement these innovative solutions in our country's context. And I would like to give the floor back to the moderator. Gaukhar, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yernar. This has been a brilliant introduction to our session and very valuable and insightful presentation. Thank you. And I mean, building an investment opportunity index, I think it's something new. I mean, I come from a foreign direct investment background myself and currently advise governments around the world on their investment and economic policies. I think maybe later you could maybe also speak about how that would correlate with the competitiveness index that we have from the World Economic Forum. And we have Dolgun Basandava joining us in our session. And thank you for joining our session, Dolgun. Dolgun is the Deputy Chairman of the National Development Agency of Mongolia and also a CAMCA network member. We're happy to see you, Dolgun. And reflecting from Yernar's presentation, I mean, 22nd Mongolia and 89th Kazakhstan. This is a very diverse region, and this is just two countries that he briefly touched upon. Would you maybe share with us the success of Mongolia? How is it that Mongolia, being in the same region, also landlocked between the superpowers, and nonetheless doing so well in investments? Floor to you, Dolgun.
Thank you, Gaukhar, and thank you for inviting me in this forum. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to share a part of that success. I'd also like to present existing challenges that we face here in Mongolia. The National Development Agency is responsible for the policies on foreign direct investment as well, and we also develop the long-term and medium and short-term development policies in Mongolia, and our mandate is quite broad within the government. So let's start with how did Mongolia do in this period of COVID pandemic. I give you a bit of statistics, and then I like to share some experience behind it. The foreign direct investment kind of fell 27% in 2020 due to COVID, when the world global investment level compared to Mongolia, global level of foreign direct investment fell about 40+%. So we kind of doing well compared to the world, but still our expected investment was much higher, as you see at the numbers. And the National Development Agency conducted a survey among foreign invested companies and find out main reasons. And one of the main reasons is the restrictions of investors, as well as restrictions put on the local companies to travel abroad. And that is one of the top reasons which we can address in the coming future, as we believe we got the COVID situation under control. And over the last 30 years, if we analyze a bit deeply what the foreign direct investment into Mongolia is related with, we find that the foremost and the biggest impact on increase or decrease on foreign direct investment in Mongolia during the non-COVID period is commodity prices. So when the commodity prices rises, the FDI into Mongolia increases, and when the commodity prices falls, it also decreases. So it reflects and highly correlated with the commodity prices for obvious reasons. And is that exactly Mongolia want? Is that yes and no? Let's say what we have now is 80% of the foreign direct investment into Mongolia in the last 10 years is in natural resources. So over the future, like as I'd like to share some of our policy priorities, is that for the future, we'd like to change the composition of the FDI as well as FDI types. So how we want to change the composition is that we want to move FDI, foreign direct investment in mining and natural resources into non-mining, and that's what the Mongolian government is giving more priority to. And the second, it's also in terms of types. So if you look at the FDI, it's very broad, and it doesn't give much information to the countries, because we'd like to categorize foreign direct investment into 4 types. The first type is investment in natural resources. So we call that, the literature call this natural resource seeking investment. The second type is a strategic asset seeking, like a beautiful beach on the shores of a beautiful lake. Might be the companies might be interested in those very spots that attracts tourism, and that's how if that investment is to be categorized, it's categorized as strategic asset seeking. And the third type of FDI is a local market, kind of market seeking, which means like Coca-Cola. Like we have Coca-Cola factory in Mongolia, and that's so it's foreign products selling locally, right? So this is the third type. The fourth type is efficiency seeking. Efficiency seeking. The most important among all FDI types is efficiency seeking. And if I just speak for Mongolia, if we look at in last 8 years, 80% of FDI is into Mongolia can be categorized as natural resource seeking. The second, about 13% of FDI into Mongolia can be categorized as market seeking. About 3% of FDI into Mongolia can be categorized as strategic asset seeking. So we attracted almost none of those efficiency seeking investments. But what drives salaries, what drives productivity within the country is efficiency seeking investments that comes with the transfer of technologies, that comes with the transfer of know-how, and that comes with transfer of other factors that really contributes into the improvement of labor productivity in a country. So our policy at National Development Agency is how to improve this efficiency seeking type of FDIs in the future. Of course, we welcome the resource seeking investments, because that's how Mongolia going to, we can't just get immediately be off the natural resource seeking, and obviously the mining sector will continue to play important part in Mongolian economy, and that's also a part of our policy. But the weight of the natural resource seeking FDI, we'd like to reduce in the mining sector, but increase in more other types of FDI, especially the efficiency. And in order to attract more of those efficiency-seeking FDIs, Mongolia need to do our homework, right? Now, what is the homework? So let's say we are now doing the annual development plan. Right now, it's been discussed at the parliament, and the part of the policy at this at the core of annual development plan is to build specific infrastructures that improves and that also increases the business environment, especially for those foreign investors, and make any efficiency-seeking foreign investment more bankable. Let's say, if you buy a land, I'll give just an example which illustrates, I think it will make it easier to understand. Say any investor comes into a country and say, we need 100 hectares of land in order to build a factory that exports certain amount of products. But if the investor builds its own heating system, it needs to build own electricity transition lines, and any other infrastructure that's required to the successful operation at the factory, then the cost of the investment further increases, and at some point it's not going to be bankable project for any investor. So if we have enough of those infrastructure at the local level, then we probably can attract more of those export-oriented, efficiency-seeking investors into this country. But in last, let's say in last 10 years, what Mongolia is known for is it's known for its mineral resources. But at the same time, if you look specifically into those investors, they're highly the investors and resources is very more tolerant to risks, and also the projects they invest is more greenfield, right? So now we step by step try to change so that we have greater productivity in our labor force, also greater transformation of know-how as well as technology in non-mining sectors as we progress into a more developed country as our income increases. So that's our plan. And one thing here I'd like to also share with our colleagues here is that how much political will is there, right? Any country, if let's say we have CAMCA countries here, and the more important question right now in regard to investment is whether the country has a political will so that it protects investment and it improves the business environment that's very friendly to foreign investors as well as local investors. And if there is a political will, I believe the country will step by step improve its indicators and take care of other factors such as necessary infrastructure so that investors will both benefit in their investment. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dolgun. Thank you. I think you've mentioned one of the sensitive points in the investments in the region, that 80% of incoming investments are into the natural resources. That is something that every country is trying to address. And moreover, by inviting investors who indeed are technology and expertise intensive. And I think another additional point, which I see currently in the investment community here in London, is the ESG compliance, especially when companies come into natural resources sector. So that's very valuable. Thank you very much. I would like to turn now to another resources-rich country in the region, Azerbaijan, and we have Yusuf Abdullayev with us, who is an acting president of the Azerbaijan Export and Investment Promotion Foundation. I believe that Azerbaijan is facing similar issues with investments being directed, well, at least previous years, directed into natural resources. However, from what I hear, from what I know, especially from our sessions yesterday as well, that Azerbaijan is developing its transport sector and really investing in its human capital and transportation and agriculture. So floor to you, Yusuf. Welcome to our session, and please, yes, turn your microphone on.
Thank you very much, Gaukhar. Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize because I've been connected a little bit late, because we have here in Azerbaijan today the Minister of Economy of UAE, Mr. Abdullah bin Tol Kalmari. So I was with him, and that was a little bit unscheduled. So sorry for this being late. Thank you for this opportunity. Of course, first of all, I welcome everyone attending the video conference, and I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me to this platform, for sharing the views and ideas. And but the Gaukhar, as you've just said, yeah, you're right. We're trying to shift, well, not to shift, trying to transform our economy from oil and gas to non-oil and gas, because maybe shift is not a right word, because we cannot shift it, because we heavily depend on it. And it's not bad, but nevertheless, we're trying to find new ways how to transform economy itself. And of course, when you're trying to transform your economy, you have to focus on the FDI, which is very important. And we are, of course, focused on FDI, which is destined for a non-oil and gas sector. But nevertheless, we're very happy and welcome all type of FDIs and in oil and gas sector as well. Well, actually, if you know, region, the current political and macroeconomic stability in Azerbaijan, and of course, reliable protection of investors' right, and of course, we are a rich natural resources country, and we have a qualified labor force because we also heavily invested in this sector. And we can say that Azerbaijan, one of the attractive countries in this region for foreign investments. For coming to figures, almost for 30 years after the regaining our independence in Azerbaijan, more than 290 billion US dollars, both domestically and the FDI, have been invested into Azerbaijan. And of course, if you look at the details, we can divide this amount like a half for oil and gas and half for non-oil and gas. But as I've said, it's domestically and internationally, the both together. Of course, the early 90s, the situation in the region was completely different. And as you probably know, after the signing in 1994, the contract of the year of the century, the situation, well, actually in oil and gas sector has drastically changed, and now we're enjoying what we've done almost 30 years ago. But nevertheless, as I've already said, we're trying to transform to non-oil and gas economy. As Aspromo, as our foundation, as Aspromo, it's like a short name of our foundation. We're Export and Investment Promotion Foundation, and our main activities is with typical IPA and the TPO. But what we're doing now, we're working on a new export strategy, national export strategy. And the parallel to this strategy, we're working on a new strategy for attracting FDI with our partners from IFC. And the national export strategy, we're working with EU experts. And of course, the main priority, as I've already said, that for us, it's very important. We put some priority sectors in all these two strategies for export and for investment. And as we said, agriculture, green energy, it's of course in the list. And we do believe that digital economy, this sector of economy also is very developing in Azerbaijan. Maybe you probably know that in Azerbaijan we opened the rep office of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's the center which now will start operate in Azerbaijan this year. And I think all these issues and all these ideas are very, very interesting. And in terms of if we, in light of the ongoing, of course, reforms, and we provided numerous incentives for investors, and we see this results in international rankings. Azerbaijan ranks 28th out of 190 countries in the world. It's the Doing Business, World Bank Doing Business program report. And we are among the top 10 most reformist countries. As you said, the transit route is also very important to mention, because we have a strategic geographic position. And of course, Azerbaijan is in the center of the east-west and the north-south corridor, and the government invested heavily in infrastructure projects, such as the reconstruction of roads, railways, especially in the direction of Georgia, Russia, Iran, and the construction of international airports, Baku International Sea Trade Port, by the way, is the biggest sea trade port in the Caspian Sea. And all these measures which have been taken, of course, it's for developing all these transit routes. But I think the situation has been changed a little bit with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic globally, and of course its subsequent spread in Azerbaijan. And we're trying to mitigate the economic impact of COVID-19 and to help the stage for quick recovery. And for that reason, the government announced the fiscal stimulus package. It's approximately $2.5 billion US dollars. But everybody is talking about the 2020 years as pandemic years, but I would like to say that for Azerbaijan, 2020, it was the year where it was the victory year, because we liberated our lands in Karabakh, and in terms of attracting investors to that region, because there are and there will be tremendous opportunities in terms of everything, in terms of transit, in terms of infrastructure projects, construction, agriculture. And the president of Azerbaijan has announced that region for open for green projects as well. So this is another very important issue for Azerbaijan. And also beginning this year, the president has signed a decree about socioeconomic development of country for 2030. It's the like a vision for 2030, and all strategy which we're now working on, they are within this vision, the conceptual paper. And that vision has the 5 main pillars, and one of that pillars I've already mentioned. It's the digital economy, of course, the stability, and green economy. Green economy, it's also a green project. It's also a very important area where we would like to focus. But the name of the session, it's impediments to FDI, and it's some, let's say, to obstacles. Of course, there are some obstacles, but I don't want to relate them to the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's okay, it's everywhere, but we do believe that it will continue maximum 1 year or year and a half. But what we see that investors, international companies, they are more changing their way from production economy to consumption economy. So, and with our population, with this region, you cannot focus only on your country. So I believe that the other very important issue is the promotion and what we're now doing in Azerbaijan to connect our companies to global value chains, because this is very important. And yes, some experts, they like divide it in two ways, that they say that it's transforming from GDC to ARVIS to regional value chains. But nevertheless, we should promote both of them. And I think that what I've just said, that shifting from, it's just our ideas, it's just our opinions, what we see with when we're talking to the investors, that they looking for a big markets. And of course, that's in our export strategy, we put a very important issue, that we have to sign FTAs, foreign trade agreements, as more as we can, because this is very important. In order to invest, you have to find the right niche, right market. You have to have a right market for your product or a service. And what we now see, that let's say the population and the size of the country, it not means a lot, but it means something. And of course, as I've said, the liberated territories, just imagine it's the 20% of our territory. And it's the area like Lebanon, just imagine. And I think these liberated lands and opportunities which we can provide to the investors will open the new doors. And of course, maybe this is not a right platform to talk about this, but nevertheless, as Azerbaijani, I'm very happy that we finally liberated our lands. I think, by the way, as Aspromo, we are the member of WIPA, World Association of Investment Promotion Agency. We've been holding the position of vice presidency for 4 years. Now we are holding the position of director of Central Asia and Caucasus. And of course, we had numerous meetings, and the discussion was also our partners within the WIPA. Of course, the main problem that we're facing now is the pandemic. But as said Dulgun, is absolutely right, that we also have to look at the quality of FDI. It's very important, and of course, we also put it it's on our strategy. As I've said, we are weighting these two strategies for national export and for attraction of FDI, and we do believe that we can provide them until the end of this year, because it's too hard to convince the government that we have to spend the money in order to promote our country. Well, actually, that's all. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this platform. And we're not, as I understood that, we're not a member of CAMCA, but we would like to be the active member of CAMCA, and because development of this region, in all countries in this region, it's very important for us. And I do believe that together we can manage it on, let's say, a very high level. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It has been very informative. I believe there are 2 points which I would like to highlight from your speech. One is joining efforts in raising awareness on the global investment arena, because it is evident that the region is not is still terra incognita for many investors, large corporations, smaller companies, especially if we're speaking about technologies and expertise. So this is really something that we could work together, especially on the platform of the CAMCA network. And thank you for your interest in joining and contributing to our network. And another speaker that we have, which I introduced in the beginning, is Baurzhan Kankin, who has a background working with investors who operated in Kazakhstan or continue operations in Kazakhstan. He is currently the chairman of the Social Entrepreneurship Corporation, and I believe you work in partnership with foreign investors who come to work in the Shymkent region or the southern Kazakhstan region. Baurzhan, the floor to you. Could you please tell us of your experience as part of the investment? On other side, what are the impediments, as Yusuf did indeed mentioned that it is the name of our session. Therefore, I think maybe you could speak more about the challenges that you faced.
Thanks, Gaukhar. Thanks to Michael Selman, who I'm replacing today. It was a short notice for me, but nevertheless, I'm here. Today it would be the most sincere and frank speech from official governor of Kazakhstan, I think. In terms of investment, from a local perspective, it's not a rocket science. Of course, as Yernar mentioned, he gave us a helicopter view for indexes, graphics, a lot of data, and our speaker from Mongolia, Dulgun, mentioned a lot about the commodities, about the correlation, but I think, of course, even in Azerbaijan, we spent a lot of attention to some global projects. But I would speak about some smaller projects, not from municipality perspective as Shymkent, and I think it's not a rocket science. We still have to do our best, and we need to pay a lot of attention to our resources. For example, in Shymkent, we have a lot of traffic from investors. They come and visit in Shymkent every day, and we just couldn't host the people just because of some lack of resources. For example, we don't have electricity in Shymkent, and we couldn't host people. We couldn't host a lot of investors to Shymkent. I know it's very bad information, but it's our reality. And I think it's not only a problem of Shymkent. I think all cities from CAMCA region facing the same problem. It's a lack of infrastructure. It's a lack of land resources. It's a lack of everything. I think we just need to pay attention for infrastructure, to the people, to the investors who is interested in CAMCA region. And as I mentioned before, it's not a rocket science. So my philosophy here, long story short, my philosophy here that we have to pay attention to infrastructure. For example, specifically in Shymkent, it's a huge problems with infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, a lot of investors who is visiting Shymkent, they couldn't get chance to build something here, and that's the main problem of Shymkent. And I think that's the same problem we are facing in CAMCA region. Of course, we can speak about the some indexes. We can speak about some macroeconomic and microeconomic, but in reality, from municipality perspective, because we are executors, we still have just very immaterial problems, which is not which you couldn't resolve. It's everything in our hands, and we just need to pay attention. And also, one point, which is this Michael Selman's most favorite topic, it's about bureaucracy and the corruption. And I think that's also a good topic, maybe not for this panel session, but I think CAMCA region, and it should be clear for everybody, and we have to accept this problem. Once we will accept this problem, we can resolve and we can move on. It's about the bureaucratic procedures in CAMCA regions. For example, very simple land contribution, which will take 6 months to get the land plot. I think that's a small and very simple example how far we are from attracting investors. And we have also a question from our agenda: what should be changed after COVID-19? And from my speech, I think you can understand that we don't have to change something. I mean, to create something extraordinary, because we still at very pure level of attracting investors, and we don't have to think about how to change policy after COVID-19. We still have to resolve our basic needs. Basic needs for investors: it's infrastructure, landlord availability, and bureaucracy, and that's it. So it's not rocket science. It's very simple, and we just need to do our best to attract investors to CAMCA region.
Thank you very much. I think first of all, we have already questions from our audience here, and we can now move on to questions from the audience, and I have a few of my own. So I think Baurzhan was our last speaker for this session. We are, however, missing perspective from Uzbekistan, from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan at this point. However, I believe, Yernar, you did that study. You have a better view of what's going on in all of the region. Maybe you could add a few points of where are the countries right now. I remember pre-pandemic, Uzbekistan was named the country of the year by The Economist of year 2019. I mean, this is something valuable for the region, because we're talking about the whole world, and here is our neighbor who is a country of the year because of the reforms it has undertaken, of all the changes that are happening in the country. But those events are happening in all the countries in the region, and the reforms, the changes, and other opportunities. And as Baurzhan mentioned, I think we indeed did not voice the fact that corruption and bureaucracy are main impediments in the region, because they are the challenges that on the way to transparency. That's what investor community is looking for, and security of their property and investments. Yernar, could you share a bit in brief your views on the rest of the region, and then we proceed to questions?
Sure, Gaukhar, thank you. Well, look, I mean, I want to echo what Baurzhan was really emphasizing, really getting the basics right. In the end, of course, we have, what I mentioned about the investment opportunity index. It's an attempt to measure the macro level, but in the end, it boils down to the real issues on the ground, the real challenges that cities, the city governance face, or businesses face. So overall, I think it's fair to say that for the whole region of CAMCA, I totally agree. We need to really face the fact that we have issues of getting the basics right in terms of, for instance, FDI restrictiveness would include something that we call bureaucratic impediments to foreign direct investment and domestic investment as well, by the way. So bureaucracy is number one issue. I guess the second issue is, of course, rent seeking and corruption. Clearly, it's something that all of our governments are fighting against, but it's a long battle, and we're still in work in progress. So the rent seeking and its quality of civil service that are administering the customs, etc., would be the permanent permission of different permits, etc. It's all to do with this quality of civil service, and it's symbolic that we are talking about these issues on the international UN established Civil Servants Day. So whoever is civil servant here in this panel, I'd like to congratulate you with your professional day. It's because it's a lot of things are done by the civil service. So we should think about the quality of civil service and how to motivate them. And number three is, of course, unfair competition. That is that cuts across all the CAMCA countries. We have issues with we see that the unfair competition and of course the risks of expropriation is still there in many of the CAMCA countries. So I think it's something that is being dealt with, but I think there's still a way to go for all economies, including Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is an interesting country that is, of course, impressive in terms of now really opening up, and that's why the country of the year is Uzbekistan, clearly because of the changes that were made and introduced, because of the limitations that they had before, high barriers and trade barriers and all these customs issues were resolved over a short period of time. I think we need to commend the government of Uzbekistan in terms of really making changes, but there's a long way to go that we need to, I guess, learn from each other to really support each other based on the experiences and good practices that that we see in the region.
Thank you so much, Yernar. Thank you. I would briefly touch about a little bit more on innovation after we answer questions which we have from our audience. So the question is about access and cost of capital for projects in the region. So basically project financing options. So what are the thoughts of our speakers on the cost of capital and access to capital for the projects in the region? Who would like to pick up the question?
Well, actually, Gaukhar, if I can comment.
Yes, please. Yes.
Well, actually, it's very, let's say, a complicated question, which has more than 5 answers. But of course, I agree that capital markets, of course, should be developed. But what we can suggest, what we're suggesting in Azerbaijan, we have a very accurate system of financing the project. We have some business development funds and within the Ministry of Economy, and they, of course, they provide some loans to the projects, to the businessmen, but it's rates, it's on very low rates, and but nevertheless, as I understood from the question, that the capital markets, it's another issue in another sector which should be developed. Of course, access to finance is always the issue, and access to finance for SME is a very important issue. Recently, we had a very big conference regarding this topics, because, as I've said, it's very important. But nevertheless, in Azerbaijan, we're trying to create this platform for entrepreneurs that they can take loans. And of course, we have a very good, I think, banking system. Let's say it's improving. 5, 7, 10 years ago, the situation was completely different, but now it's improving, it's improved. But of course, there are still rooms that we should work on it. But nevertheless, we have some, I think, a very good system for financing the projects. For me, it was very interesting when Baujan said that in very negative way that you cannot meet and you cannot connect with investors. So if I cannot ask the question, so but what is the problem? Just to understand, to be a little bit, can you clarify what does it mean that you cannot meet the investors? So what's the problem? Thank you.
No, my point was about the not to meet investors, but to offer the basic needs, as Yernar mentioned, also the basic needs for infrastructure. For example, last year, since I joined the SEC Shymkent, it's a regional development institution of Shymkent, one of the 17 regions of Kazakhstan, and we attracted 1 billion. It's $1 billion. It's around 90% of city investments, which SEC Shymkent never did before. And I didn't change fiscal policy. Commodity prices was still the same. So I didn't change taxation. We are centralized by Nursultan. So actually, I didn't change. I mean, macroeconomics didn't change around the Shymkent region. But what we did, we just did our work, and we just did our best effort. We just met people, and we just provided land plots, infrastructure, some funding also, as well as our attendees has a question about the funding. So, but we're still facing the problem of availability of resources. So all 3 economic zones are full. all industrial zones are full. We have a lot of land plots, but they are occupied by private sector. It's not available for potential investors. So people, for example, last time I met with a Turkish company who wants to produce a paper, just simple paper, just a very clear investor. Everything was very simple, but we didn't have a land plot. So they waited for a few months, and just because of no any opportunity for them, they just leave the Shymkent.
Did they go to another region of Kazakhstan, or they left the country altogether, Barzhan?
Oh, no, they leave Almaty, I guess, if I'm not mistaken.
So they went to another region.
It's the same country. So it's not about the competition about the countries, but it's still about the competition between the cities.
Yes, I mean, Kazakhstan is a large country. It's the 9th largest, so it's natural that resource availability varies from region to region. And I think it is something indeed to be considered in the investment strategies, that the policies that the country does on the Republican level. Yes.
Just another example, we have an investor from Hungary who is flying with his private jet from Hungary to Shymkent. Shymkent is not San Francisco, but they're still interested in Shymkent. But we couldn't offer them. So because it's lack of resources, even in Shymkent, even in Kazakhstan, even we are a big country, we still have a lot of land plots, but there is no infrastructure. I mean, you can build something there, but how you will operate if you don't have any infrastructure? So it's all about basic needs.
You're right on point, because this is how the World Bank actually, it says that the development stands on 2 pillars, the infrastructure development and human capital development. And you're absolutely right on point. I think this is something that needs to catch up. I mean, it is quite a capital intensive to build infrastructure and to make it available for investors. But this is something for our policy makers to think about and to consider, I mean, all throughout the region. Thank you very much, Yusuf, for answering the question on the capital, access to capital. I think it is indeed something challenging, because if we were to look at loans that companies could take within the country, the interest rates are exorbitant. I mean, nowhere in comparison to many other markets which are seeking foreign direct investments as well. So this is why private equity and partnerships is something that's more interesting for local partners. So would anyone else like to add on the capital, access to capital and the cost of capital? If not, then we'll proceed to the next question. No, okay. So I think we have it at that. Yes, indeed, it's expensive, but it is a macroeconomic issue that needs to be addressed, again, with the policies and other issues. As you all know, there was a G7 summit in the UK in Cornwall, where tech development, technology has been identified as the growth driver for the global economy. And this is post-pandemic technological boom that we will see in the coming years. I made basically just a few notes about the innovation index, global innovation index 2020. And if we were to look at developed countries such as USA, it's at 60.5, United Kingdom 59.7, Germany at 56, France at 53, Israel at 53. And the region, our region, in comparison, Georgia at 31, so that's half, okay. Kazakhstan 28, Azerbaijan 27, Uzbekistan 24.5. So if we are talking about diversifying our economies, if we're talking about bringing in investors which are more favorable to the local community, creating jobs, bringing technology expertise and so forth, technological advancement is one of those issues that need to be addressed. What do you feel, I mean, this is a question to the speakers, what do you think, I mean, in addition to the infrastructure, which we addressed before, are the impediments to that meeting of investments and technology advancement? How can the region and the countries advance technologically with the help of foreign investors?
Let me jump in first.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so in terms of innovation, again, I would give you a very pure example. There is no need to create a lot of tons of some policies, documentation, some tons of paperwork. For example, as a pure example, in Nur-Sultan, so in Kazakhstan, at some point you couldn't even order a Uber or Yandex. So there is no need to speak about some policies and paperwork. We just need to create, again, infrastructure. Once you give infrastructure to people who can use these products, everybody can jump in. So we need to start to pay attention to basics and needs. And I think ordering a Uber in Nur-Sultan, I mean, it's a good example of innovation in our countries. Even in Navai or in Urgench in Uzbekistan, I lived for 1 year in Uzbekistan. It's no internet, so there is no innovations and no need to think about the high-level documentations.
Thank you, Bojan. Indeed, we return back to the this time ICT infrastructure, I suppose.
Everything is simple.
All right. Well, I think we can confidently close the session, and I would like to summarize the points that we made on the impediments to foreign investments in the CAMCA region. Dolgun, you would like to add something before we close? Yes, please.
Yes, please. There was a question in a Q&A section in Zoom, so I'd like to answer that question. The question is that the difference between International Finance Institute financing versus some bilateral loans. So just I'd like to share some experience here in Mongolia. The bilateral loans are quite expensive, like not in terms of interest rates. In terms of interest rates, they're very, very, very good deals. But then what happens is there's so many binding conditions that comes with the bilateral loan, which means the project itself, whatever we get the bilateral loan for, ended up quite expensive. And like compared to what amount of infrastructure or any development is made in the country. And therefore, the policy at this point in time in Mongolia is that we are kind of luckily developed a consensus on no more bilateral loans. I'm not naming any names on any country because it seems to be, at least in our history and what we have done, it's not just about any country. Most of the bilateral loans are end up very expensive in terms of what, how much penny per project, right? And then we will only only get multilateral financing. That's been a lesson for us. And another a lesson that I like to share before we just close the forum is that we developed the local consensus that there shouldn't be any build and transfer concessions. Like if we have a project developed with concessions, then it needs to be build, operate, and transfer. On BOT, concessions can help us to minimize the level of costs because BT concessions end up major pressure or major burden in the budget, and it end up very expensive given not the problem is not the nature of BT or BOT concessions. The problem is politics itself, and given similar problems across the CAMCA region, I expect that if any of us here end up in planning or in Ministry of Finance or any other government organizations, it's quite a good lesson to have so that we make less mistakes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dolgun. Well, in summarizing, indeed, bilateral loans are a question right now for many developing countries, actually, not only in our region. So infrastructure seems to be one of the biggest impediments, bureaucracy, these kind of the soft infrastructure that we're talking about is another one. Then, of course, the corruption and the transparency and security of property for foreign direct investments in the region is another. Nonetheless, the region is developing at a fast pace. I mean, the recent economics show that there is a growth rate anywhere from 3% up to 5% in some countries. So it is an opportunity, especially in the light of all the new developments that we see right now, and with the human capital that it is available in the region. It is another one of the biggest issues. And I think it is an opportunity still, despite all the impediments, and I think to validate that there are so many companies that are still coming into the region, and there are many companies that are coming out of the region for listings on Hong Kong Stock Exchange or the London Stock Exchange. It is quite optimistic despite all the impediments. So I would like to thank you all the speakers today for this very insightful conversation, and thank you to our audience for your questions and for your attention. And we look forward to hosting you at our CAMCA network forum, which we would hopefully have next time in person, as we usually love to do that. Thank you to all.